Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely fascinating. The exact step-by-step biological recipe you can use to physically rewire your adult brain. I mean, if you've ever wanted to break a bad habit, learn a really complex new skill, or even just shift how you emotionally react to things, well, you first have to understand the mechanics of how your brain actually alters its own hardware. Right off the bat, let's bust a massive myth straight from our source material. There's this quote: "One of the biggest lies in the universe is that every experience you have changes your brain." You know, it's really tempting to think your brain gets completely rewired after, say, reading a good book or having a deep conversation. But honestly, the adult brain is highly guarded against random changes. Change doesn't just happen, it requires a very specific key to unlock it. So here's our roadmap for today. We are going to cover 4 sections: the neuroplasticity paradigm, the chemistry of change, visualizing mental focus, and finally, rest, sleep, and rewiring. Let's jump straight into section 1, the neuroplasticity paradigm. Okay, so what exactly is neuroplasticity? By definition, it's your nervous system's incredible ability to change and customize its wiring in response to specific experiences. Your brain is quite literally a customized map of your life. It's like a giant puzzle that constantly rearranges itself. Think about individuals who are blind from birth. Their visual cortex, the area at the back of the brain normally dedicated entirely to sight, it doesn't just sit there dormant. No way. It gets completely overtaken by hearing and touch. Our source shares this fascinating case of a blind woman whose visual cortex was entirely rewired to process braille and hearing. Her brain dynamically remapped its own real estate to maximize her unique sensory inputs. It's just mind-blowing. But, and this is a big but, we have to look at how this works across our lifespan. Because childhood plasticity is wildly different from adult plasticity. Babies are born with these widely connected, incredibly crude neural networks. Basically, they flop around like little potato bugs, passively absorbing the world around them. Their brains are literally designed to change almost automatically. But after age 25 or so, that passive plasticity totally shuts off. And by the way, let's bust another popular myth right now. Adults do not magically grow tons of new neurons just from, going for a jog. For us adults, plasticity is highly gated. It requires a very active, deliberate process. So, what's the secret? Well, for adults, awareness is the absolute vital first step. You have to consciously recognize what you want to change. There's this brilliant, kind of funny anecdote from the source material about a woman at a 2-week course who was heavily stressed out simply by the speaker's tone of voice. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just stressful. It caused a visceral reaction because it reminded her of a terrible past experience. But by consciously acknowledging it and bringing that reaction into her active awareness, her brain started to adapt. By the end of the course, his voice became totally tolerable to her. Just recognizing an unwanted reaction signals your prefrontal cortex that this particular reflex is no longer fated to be a reflex. Moving right along to section 2, the chemistry of change. To figure out the exact biological formula required to unlock that gated adult plasticity, we've got to look at the groundbreaking Merzenich experiments from the early 1990s. In the lab, adult subjects placed their fingers on a spinning drum covered in little bumps. They were told to press a lever whenever the distance between the bumps subtly changed. Now, when they paid super careful attention to the touch, their brain maps for their fingers physically changed, and very rapidly. But here is the real kicker. The researchers then had them touch the exact same bumps, but asked them to pay attention to a sound, an auditory tone, instead. When their attention shifted to the sound, the touch maps in the brain did not change at all. Zero. It proved that the mere physical action of experiencing something doesn't change the adult brain. Intense, deliberate attention to a specific stimulus is the absolute prerequisite. And why is attention so important? It all comes down to neurochemistry. You need a very specific chemical cocktail to force your brain to change. Step 1 is epinephrine, also known as adrenaline. This brings the energy and alertness. And honestly, your brain doesn't care if that alertness comes from a strong cup of coffee, falling in deep love, or absolute fear. It just needs that wake-up signal. Step 2 is acetylcholine, released from the brainstem, which acts like a sensory spotlight, highlighting the specific incoming data you're looking at or listening to. And step 3 is a localized, super powerful release of acetylcholine from an area called the nucleus basalis in the forebrain. When you combine raw alertness with those 2 precise spotlights of acetylcholine, your nervous system doesn't just have the option to change, it absolutely has to change. Which begs the question, right? How on earth do we naturally increase acetylcholine and alertness in the real world when we don't have electrodes hooked up to our brains in some science lab? That brings us perfectly to section 3, visualizing mental focus. Here's where we transition from abstract biology into a super practical tool. Cognitive focus in the brain is deeply anchored to our visual system. Simply put, mental focus follows visual focus. When you look broadly around a room, taking everything in, your eyes and your brain are relaxed. But when you physically narrow your eyes, converging your gaze on a specific, small visual target, you shrink your visual window. And doing this physical action with your eyes literally activates the exact neurons in your brainstem to release the epinephrine and acetylcholine you need for learning. Okay, so here is the exact protocol. 60 to 120 seconds. If you sit down to learn something hard or read a really complex paper and you feel your attention drifting, just take 1 to 2 minutes to stare intensely at a small visual target at the exact distance of your work, like pick a tiny spot on your computer screen. Blinking is totally fine, but hold your visual focus right there. This directly primes your neurochemistry, elevating your signal-to-noise ratio, and perfectly sets you up for deep cognitive absorption. Once you trigger that focus, you want to utilize what science calls an ultradian learning bout. This lasts about 90 minutes. Now listen, when you start this 90-minute cycle, you are going to feel agitated. Your attention is going to drift. Most people think this means they just can't focus. But actually, that agitation is just a sign that the epinephrine is working in your system. It is completely normal. The first 5 to 10 minutes are just a warm-up of flickering focus. As you continually anchor your eyes back to your work, you'll enter deep focus for the middle hour, before naturally disengaging as that 90-minute cycle wraps up. And finally, section 4, rest, sleep, and rewiring. Get ready because here is the most counterintuitive part of this entire explainer. Neuroplasticity doesn't actually happen when we are focusing. Nope, it happens when we sleep. That intense 90-minute bout of agony and focus you just went through, it didn't actually rewire your brain yet. It only chemically marked the synapses that need to change. The actual structural rewiring, the physical building of new neural pathways, only occurs during deep rest and sleep. Think of it like this. We can clearly contrast these two phases. In the active waking phase, you're generating alertness and spotlighting attention. The acetylcholine is essentially putting a metabolic stamp on specific neural circuits, saying, hey, remember this. But it's in the resting phase, later that night when you finally go to sleep, that those highlighted circuits actively strengthen or weaken. If you don't sleep, the stamp just fades away, and the learning simply doesn't physically manifest in the brain. But wait, you can actually accelerate this process. Recent data from a complex spatial memory test, where subjects had to remember these really long, difficult sequences of lights, proved something incredible. If subjects engaged in a 20-minute non-sleep deep rest protocol, also known as NSDR, or just took a shallow nap immediately after the intense learning bout, their memory retention was dramatically accelerated compared to just waiting for nighttime sleep. Even deliberately letting your mind wander mindlessly, like just going for a walk without your phone or music, signals to your brain that the intense marking phase is over and the rewiring process can safely begin. It's a real game changer. So you've got the blueprint now. We know the chemistry, we know how to trigger it with our visual focus, and we know how rest ultimately cements the changes. So I want to leave you with this one thought. What specific change do you want to wire into your brain today? And at what time of day are you naturally most alert to begin? Protect those hours, lock in your visual focus, embrace the agitation, and then just let your brain do the heavy lifting while you rest.